Good morning. We'll just give a couple of minutes for delegates to join the session, but welcome to those joining now.
I think you definitely have the most interesting background, Josh. I'm definitely at the bottom of the list on that one.
That's just years of being able to sell it as slightly more interesting than it is.
Very good. Okay. Thank you very much for joining us this morning, and welcome to our Building a Winning CRO Strategy event. I'm just going to take a few minutes to run through a little bit of housekeeping ahead of the session. So my name is Mark Bainbridge. I'm co-founder of Dragonfly AI. Delighted to be joined this morning by our panel of experts, each accomplished in the world of conversion rate optimization. But before I introduce our guests, just a few points on housekeeping. So first, we will be recording the session, and a link will be sent afterwards. So if you miss any of it, or if there's anything you'd like to share onwards, then please feel free to do so. Very much an interactive session, so please do ask questions, share your thoughts. We'll try and get to them at the end of the panel discussion. If you want to pose a question, please can you use the chat function. We're scheduled for the webinar to last around 40 minutes, at the end of which delegates are welcome to join some breakout sessions, and we'll publish a link during the course of the session, so you can click on that if you'd like to jump into a slightly more bespoke session with our experts. To look at some of your insights and see what we can help to show you with those. And then finally, we would like to thank you all for attending. So now, without further ado, it'd be great if I could take the opportunity to introduce our guests. So starting with Sandeep Shah, who joins us from our strategic partners, Web Trends Optimized. Sandeep is the Director of Product and has worked in the conversion rate optimization personalization space since 2012. He brings a wealth of experience in successful tests and techniques. So welcome, Sandeep. Josh McGlone is a conversion consultant and a great friend of Dragonfly. Josh has experience building and running optimization programs in-house across a wide range of industries, including insurance, travel, e-commerce, and information security. Most recently, he's joined conversion.com, which is the largest dedicated CRO agency in the UK, which is very exciting, leading on developing the CRO strategy for a number of the big key accounts they've got there. And last but by no means least, our very own James Harvey, our Chief Product Officer, currently responsible for product strategy and execution at Dragonfly AI. For those that don't know who we are, we're a predictive analytics platform designed to help creative marketing and insights teams to improve the effectiveness of content and experiences across any channel. And to find out a bit more about what we do specifically, please do take the opportunity to join the breakouts at the end. So we'll be spending the next 40 minutes exploring really how to build a winning CRO strategy. So if I could start by opening up the first sort of area for discussion to set a scene really regarding the CRO space. So I'd like to start by understanding a bit more about the technologies that are currently being used by leading CROs. And I wonder, Josh, would you like to kind of kick us off with a few thoughts on technologies of consequence?
Yeah, absolutely. I think first and foremost, it's a really quite exciting time to be sort of involved in CRO, with the digital boom that we saw kind of off the back of the pandemic, probably one of the few positives, so to speak, of it. More and more companies are starting to sort of leverage experimentation and to get more and more heavily involved in it. And I think off the back of that as well, more and more of them are realizing how difficult it can be to get it quite right. There's a lot of different elements to CRO, and there's obviously different technology elements to support all of those kind of facets, if you like. So there's, from the more basic stuff of project management side of things, whether that's something as simple as a Trello board, to fully fledged kind of automation platforms that are running everything for you. And then, actually getting down into the A/B testing platforms, the personalization algorithms and things that can go along with that. Then you've got qualitative insights, heat maps, scroll maps, digital experience platforms that are becoming more and more prevalent. And yeah, I think it's hard to kind of wade through, I think, especially as a newbie, to wade through all of those different tools, all of which have their own perceived value when it comes to experimentation, and to drill down into actually what's going to be vital for me to succeed early and to start getting some wins, to start, in most businesses, proving the value of experimentation before we start to kind of get a bit more heavy investment and grow that program. So there's a lot out there to try and sift through.
Thank you, Josh. And obviously that probably leads to some. Sandeep, do you want to kind of give us a view on how do we kind of make sense of this, this array of tools at our disposal? Can you give us some insights from your perspective?
Yeah, It's interesting for sure. I should have thought of it as exciting as well, which Josh mentioned. I thought, it is actually quite exciting. Any problems that we have nowadays, there seems to be a solution for, whether it's to do something faster and easier, which a lot of tools do, and that's kind of what they're there to, keep you organized, keep you on track, all that kind of stuff is great. And then I guess you look at, the actual doing side of things as well. And even that space is littered, I guess, for lack of a better term, with tools. There's probably dozens of tools in most sectors or, most functions, I guess, that do a given thing. If you look at heat maps, there are countless ones, or traditional heat maps, I should say. If you look at experimentation, personalization, recommendations engines, delivering social proofing, analyzing data, I guess, is probably a smaller space, but to a certain extent, there's a lot of tools you can look at for that direction as well. So I guess trying to find, what you should even use, right? No teams have unlimited resource. So, if you could spend the next 300 hours doing something, but you're only one person one day, where do you spend your time? What do you look at? I guess that's the bigger challenge for most people. We've taken out heat maps tools or session recording tools, I think, are probably the biggest example of it, because you're looking at someone's journey, probably live in real time, sometimes slower, I guess, or, sped up like 2 times, 4 times playback. But, you could look through 1,000 users worth of feedback, but that's an incredibly slow process, albeit the insights that you get from there could be extremely useful. So trying to understand, when is enough and where you should focus your time, I guess, are the biggest challenges to what we do as an industry.
Thanks, Sandeep. Really interesting thoughts there. James, you spend a lot of time gazing over the horizon, emerging technologies as well. Can you give a few thoughts from your perspective?
Yeah, for sure. Gazing over the horizon definitely is a nice characteristic. For us, kind of our end of the spectrum, we're kind of at the AI end, the emerging series and suite of AI tools that can kind of add to and complement, or potentially, add more decision making to a CRO. Which tools do you bring in? I think an interesting kind of dimension for me is the rise of what we would call kind of predictive analytics versus descriptive analytics tools. Descriptive analytics tools, looking backwards at what behaviors have already happened on your site, what your customers are doing. Predictive almost being something that can kind of precede that and predict how content might perform, before an interaction ever takes place. So, that's kind of close to our space and certainly something we're very interested in. But I actually kind of had a follow-up question for Josh. You kind of started by talking about, this big, we've all seen the MarTech landscape. There's so many tools out there, and, deciding what to use. But what kind of characteristics for you as a CRO consultant, putting these programs in for your clients, what characteristics do you look for? Are you looking for a combination of best-in-class point solutions, or are there tools that help bring quite a lot of things together? When you're making that choice on your stack, what are you looking for?
It's quite cliche. It's different for every client. They've all got slightly different needs and requirements that they're going to need to adhere to. I think fundamentally, though, one thing that one kind of pro, I guess, that underpins every tool that I look at is going to be, is this going to improve the velocity of our program? So one thing that I've seen both in my time kind of working in house running programs and then now working at Conversion, where they've actually got the stats to back it up, is that, when it comes down to the sort of the different levers that you've got available to you in experimentation, whether that be win rate or velocity, usually the thing that's going to help you most maximize kind of your gains and your revenue generation is velocity, because you can get faster wins, faster learnings, faster iterations off the back of it. So I think any tool that enables you to speed up your process, like Sandeep was saying, if I can spend a week solid watching session recordings to gain one insight, or I can have something that surfaces 10 insights to me in not even a quarter of the time, I'm going to go with the latter option where available.
Fantastic. So I think, setting out quite an interesting scenario there of quite a lot of tools to choose from, looking at the ones which are going to give us best velocity. And I love that idea of being able to, use intelligence to surface insight without us having to sort of spend hours sort of sifting through information and data. So if we kind of move on, I mean, is there an impact for, say, artificial intelligence creeping into the world of the CRO space, and how's it been adopted? I mean, James, we obviously we are an artificial intelligence proposition.
Yeah.
Do you want to kind of give a little bit of a perspective about how you see it, and then we can kind of share some other thoughts from Sandeep and Josh?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I mean, yeah, of course, Dragonfly AI, we are an AI solution, and we fit into kind of one of those categories. But, I think the AI space, for anything, CRO included, it can be quite broad. No matter what the tool is, I mean, ultimately, I think it comes down to, one of a few things. It's either, to Josh's point earlier, a tool will help you increase velocity. It'll help you maybe reduce cost, the direct cost implications of some of the research that you might be doing, help through the speed that you gain. Obviously, it can help to improve outcomes as well, improve the performance of creative, or help improve the creative that you are testing in a testing process. And also a more subtle one, I think, is consistency. So a lot of clients that we work with are looking to bring data to their decision-making process at the creative end. And it's never about replacing creativity. That's maybe something we'll talk about more later. But I think it's about having a tool in the toolkit for creative teams, production teams, design teams to really, assist with that creative process and help to roll out standards for a brand, let's say, across different regions, and have AI helping to kind of influence and shape, what good looks like based on trends and based on data. So, there's obviously a number of different places that AI can add value. There are also challenges, though. With AI, you've always got to be careful for kind of biases being built into training sets. So if you've got an AI model that can predict something, you've got to think carefully about what kind of data has been used to train that model, and is it going to be applicable to my kind of circumstances. And I think also with AI, one of the challenges is often explainability. How easy is it to understand as a user, what's going on within that black box, and how can I then apply that to my world, or how can I combine that with my own judgment? So yeah, I mean, I think a kind of broader trend there is AI driven versus AI assisted. And we're very much in the AI assisted camp. It's about augmenting really skilled teams with some extra data to help kind of fuel conversations, generate new ideas for testing, new hypotheses. But it's a fascinating area. There's a lot of different use cases for AI, which maybe we can kind of come back to in a second, but I'll pause there and see if Sandeep and Josh have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, brilliant. So Sandeep, AI, data and creativity, really interestingly sort of new dynamic in a potentially a new era of engagement with consumers. How's it impacting in the web trends world?
Yeah, it's definitely interesting for sure. In terms of the creative process, I guess, a kind of, pre-experiment almost. It's an interesting space because, the data you would nowadays, I guess, or, more recently look towards an AI to help you with, these were almost insights people would spend a long time trying to gather. So, the things themselves aren't necessarily new or unique in the sense of, no one's ever heard of this idea of, where are people looking at and where's their behavior going, where's their attention pointing towards. You would get people into a lab and spend, probably most of a week, if not a couple of weeks, in a lab session with goggles on and trying to look at, what are these people looking at when they're going through a given process. But AI for the creative side, I guess, is quite interesting as an efficiency to begin with. Saying if you could gather those insights, but within a moment, instead of having to spend probably at least a few £1,000s, probably more, finding participants and making sure they don't leave or don't turn up on the day. All of these things are things which go wrong all the time. But looking at that as an efficiency for the design process is excellent. And if the data is more solid and more useful and stuff like that as well, obviously all of that stuff is great. And then from there, looking at what AI can do in CRO, again, is huge. Whether it's from an efficiency side, whether it's looking at execution, if you were an analyst, for example, and you said, I want to deliver accurate recommendations to people, given 1,000 analysts spending several weeks, you could pick up every single segment of every single user and go, we can see with fairly good certainty exactly how they're behaving. But if you were to throw that at, a machine learning or exploration type system, having that data back to you within, we're building something like that right now. It takes like under a second to do hundreds of thousands of executions over data. I thought it was broken actually when it came back that quickly. I had to check a few times. But when you can parse millions, literally tens of millions of events within under a second, how could that possibly compare to getting analysts to try and interpret data and human error if they read numbers incorrectly or things like that? So delivery and execution, building better experiences for people is certainly one. Doing it quickly with AI is helpful, but the insight side as well, there's just no comparison. Looking at either prediction or just kind of interpolating data you already have as well.
Thanks,
I'd even, sorry, just to jump in one last thing, I'd even say there's some other kind of interesting, like emerging trends of where AI is being used as well. You've got things like problem identification for brands, looking at their assets, their SKUs across all the e-commerce channels. That you've got tools like Detail Online, those guys are doing that kind of auditing at scale across different sites. You've got even some tools looking at creative generation, automatically producing creative concepts for design teams to help accelerate the process. So, personalization, of course, massive as well, conversational search. I mean, it's a fascinating area with AI. I mean, how much of that, Josh, have you kind of, been able to embrace so far? It's such a moving target on how much is out there, isn't it?
Yeah, it seems like every day you come in and there's something new to kind of explore with it. I think definitely for me, the sort of the most helpful elements and the most prevalent elements have been those that, like I already alluded to, speed up processes, but also I suppose kind of speed up what I'd call the more I suppose diplomatic processes, dealing with a client and you're suggesting, okay, here's 2 or 3 designs for a hypothesis that we have, rather than suggesting 2 or 3 and then waiting a week to get however many different stakeholders worth of feedback. You can speed that up by saying, well, actually, we've already run this through some sort of kind of predictive technology. We know that this one is going to perform best of the 3 designs that we have, so this is the one that we're presenting to you. You can speed up that side of things. I think it's interesting as well, Sandeep, obviously you're talking about the execution side of things. It's I've been seeing kind of emerging more and more across different testing platforms where they're very proactively suggesting concepts. I can't remember which testing platform it is, but they're getting to the point of kind of automated headline testing. So, changing value propositions on homepages and things. And that's all, I think that doesn't even need any person involved in it except to hit start on the experiment. So it's interesting to see what sort of direction that's going to take and how deep, I suppose, that capability is going to be able to go.
Mm-hmm. So I'm hearing a few really interesting words coming out of the conversation so far. So volumetrics, the whole idea that we can surface insight from huge data sets, velocity, and the idea we can augment creative processes with new technologies and artificial intelligence. So, Josh, from a kind of client perspective, how are clients responding to these sort of new sets of data and information that they have at their disposal? Are they using them to best advantage?
I mean, I think any client is always really, really excited to be able to leverage new data, even if it's not abundantly clear at the start how relevant that's going to be, how useful it's going to be. I think in a lot of cases, there's that kind of choice paralysis. You've got access to so many different things that you don't know where to focus. So having a sort of effective prioritization behind that, which to my knowledge is something that AI still isn't quite, replacing me with just yet. Although that's probably jinxed it.
We're working on it, Josh.
Great, glad to hear. But yeah, it's everyone loves an insight, everyone loves a learning. So being able to draw on new things that just from working with a consultant like myself, or having a dedicated team in house, just through sheer lack of time, who wouldn't be able to kind of generate the same volume of insights. I think everyone's very, very receptive to it.
Fantastic. So brilliant. I mean, we've got a good panel of experts here and a group of delegates who I'm sure are going to be really interested to hear what your experience has been. I think between the three of you, there's many years of shared experience. Could you spend a bit of time shedding some light on one of the key lessons for good and bad that you might have learned from your experience within your sectors? I mean, Sandeep, do you want to kind of kick us off with, maybe how you face some of the challenges that you've been presented with over the course of that last time period, and how you've kind of tackled them, and what advice you could give to anyone listening in?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully not too many years, although it's been a few, I guess now. But over the years, there's all manner of challenges, I guess, that you come across. One, I guess, which is the most easily solvable, is understanding why. When you're looking at data, especially in most tools, the first view that you always see is this kind of generalist view of what's going on. And when things don't quite look right, most people come up with ideas that they're fairly sure about, because building tests, for the most part, is a fairly expensive process, in the sense of having people around, having to get stuff built and tested and live and analyzed and all these kind of things. So when things get into that process, you're already pretty sure, or I'd hope you're pretty sure, that it's a good idea to go down that route. Mm-hmm. But when things don't quite work out the way you think, and people don't respond the way you think, one of the kind of common questions that comes up all the time is why. What exactly is going wrong here? What do people not like? Who doesn't like it? Are there groups of people which absolutely hate it? But when you're looking at that kind of general conversion rate for your entire data set, you just have no idea what's going on. So, things like this in that approach go a long, long way. And then from there, it's kind of any approach you could look at. If you're doing research, how do you do better research? How do you get more information? What information is the right information? All of these things, I guess, are day-to-day challenges. Broader ones, I guess, are more organizational and things like that. But, kind of day-to-day challenges. I'm trying to achieve a thing, but is it the right thing to go with to begin with? And then if it comes back and it doesn't quite look the way you want it to, then it's like, what's going on here? Why are things looking odd?
Thank you. And Josh, lessons learned from your experience in CRO. Do you want to share some of the good and the bad with us?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the first ones was there's no such thing as a no-brainer. You can have a winning test that you've seen in a million case studies and run on different sites, and then you implement it for a client or for a company that you're working for, and it absolutely tanks revenue or just kills conversion outright. And at that point, there's a lot of, well, that's worked for them, why didn't it work for us? So I think it kind of ties back to what Sandeep was just saying about research. Just because you've seen it somewhere else doesn't mean it's going to work for you. You need to have the research and the supporting evidence that actually, this change is going to solve a problem that our customers are having, not that someone else's customers are having. I think as well, to speak more to a kind of succeeding in a program and a win rate perspective, something that I've seen is the more that you can appeal to the sort of, I guess you call it a subconscious hypothesis rather than a conscious one. You can sit in a user testing session and ask someone, what do you think of this page? And they'll tell you a million different things that they like, that they hate, and you can build hypotheses off the back of that. But if you can appeal to the slightly more, to the deeper level, to the behavioral reactions, if you've got such advanced capabilities that you can look at EKG and biometric responses and eye tracking studies and things like that, and you can build a hypothesis based off of that data. Generally speaking, we've at Conversion have seen much higher success rates with those sorts of experiments. So if you're able to access that level of understanding of a user's behavior, you can really get much bigger and more consistent wins off the back of it.
Thanks, Josh. James, I mean, we're relatively new in this world, but what have we learned at Dragonfly about the lessons that help clients to improve performance ultimately?
Yeah, and I think it's a great segue, I think, from some of the comments that Josh and Sandeep have both made. This idea of understanding why something's happening. I mean, that's really relevant for us because I think, as I alluded to before around predictive and descriptive tools, descriptive tools and data will often tell you what is happening when you're looking at analytics, what behaviors are actually being carried out, on aggregate. Whereas tools like Dragonfly and others that are at the predictive end can also help you to understand, why those behaviors might be happening. So for us, it's all around attention. It's all around how is the design being effective in drawing attention towards the things that matter. Now, it's really, really important for that to be used in the right hands. You have to have a really skilled team who understand the objectives of that piece of content or that experience. Visual hierarchy is so important, and really that only comes from that deep understanding of what you're trying to do. You're trying to orientate people towards why they're here, what the context of the page or the experience is, what actions they can take, building trust. You've got all these different signals and different drivers that as a designer, you're trying to use as levers to ultimately influence a behavior or guide people towards taking a certain action. So I think what we see time and time again is just the role of visual hierarchy in doing that. From our attention perspective, we kind of think about it as a funnel. We're at the very, very first stage of that experience funnel. Somebody, do they see something to begin with? And then if they see it, are you drawing them to the right things, the things that matter? And obviously there's a huge steps after that in terms of, do they like what they see? How do they feel about it? Is the price right? Do I trust it? And those are all much, much kind of higher level things. But from the kind of the science and the research that we do, we know that from an attention point of view, it's what we call precognitive. So it's actually universal to everybody how they react to visual stimulus. So when you're looking at a web page, or you're looking at an ad, or you're looking at any piece of content, ultimately there are some design characteristics which are drawing people towards certain things at the cost of not drawing them towards other things. So I'd really just emphasize this idea of visual hierarchy, and also prioritization. You can't draw people towards everything, because then nothing is really drawing your attention. So it's really about, as a person running these tests, having that deep understanding of why you're doing what you're doing, what you're trying to test, and ultimately making sure that the design kind of matches that. And ultimately, if you can combine tools like Dragonfly at the beginning of the process, you can kind of, to Josh's point, or Sandeep's point, it is expensive to run tests, and if you can do some of that pre-optimization before you go live, it can really help to kind of increase velocity, I guess, and improve the win rate, of your tests, or the end outcome.
Thanks, James. That's really, really helpful. So we kind of promised to set out to help our delegates joining us today to build a winning CRO strategy. So what I'm going to cheekily now ask each of you to do is to basically give us 2 thoughts that you think that delegates could potentially implement relatively easily that might add velocity, volume, and insights to their own CRO strategies. And also for our audience, I mean, if you do have questions, please do send them over in the chat, and we've got a few minutes after this section to look at any questions that might emerge. So who should we start with? Josh, you're a CRO consultant expert, so give us a 2 pennies worth of your what we should do first.
I wouldn't go throw an expert around just yet, but yeah, I think for me, really everything that we talked about has kind of been underpinned by how is it going to help you kind of prioritize things? How is it going to help you focus on the right bits of information and the right data points to be able to go after the biggest opportunities? And how is it going to help you do that quicker and more easily without having to, get bogged down in who knows how many different processes and weeks of feedback and, stakeholder sign off? Probably the 2 most important elements for me.
Thanks, Josh. Brilliant. Sandeep.
Yeah, I guess for me, one of the first things, and again, just because it is expensive, is like, make sure, there's something valid to back up the reason for you jumping into the process and building things. How much data supports what you want to do versus someone just saying, hey, we should test this. I want to do something. So, make sure you're confident of what you're doing before you just jump in. And the second one, more of a velocity point, I guess, but is iterate. Don't find a winner and go, oh, cool, job done for today. Let's look at something fresh tomorrow. It's, right, you found an improvement, but the time to iterate is always very small. Adding to a winner, tweaking the odd bit here and there and trying to make it even better probably takes you sometimes half an hour, maybe, of your time, already been tested, you're tweaking a few colors or a bit of text, no big deal. But that means you can you can run twice as many experiments if you iterate on each one. And then, the likelihood of you squeezing more, finding something a bit more interesting, that time to value or effort to value is very small for iterations.
Thanks, Sandeep. James, Give us a couple of your pearls of wisdom.
Well, I think the first one, actually, I'd really echo one of the points that the guys already mentioned around just, firstly, just having that experimentation mindset, which is obvious and kind of implicit in CRO, but just emphasize building learnings, just get started, to Josh's point, no matter where you are on the kind of maturity curve of being, data-driven, experiment-driven, within a CRO process, just having that mindset, having that approach, and we're getting the buy-in from the rest of your teams, other stakeholders on the benefits of doing that, and just getting that ball rolling, and ultimately emphasizing, your focus on the right things, the things that can give you the best ROI. I think the only other comment I'd make is again, with the role of tools, they're not there to make the decisions for you, at least not yet. They're very much, AI assisted, is how we think about it. So whether that's an AI tool or even non-AI, analytics tools or other, it's all about augmenting, you as someone who's really well positioned to understand what you're trying to achieve, what are the drivers behind this test, what are the business goals ultimately behind what you're trying to do. And those tools are just there to assist you, help you, speed up that process and ultimately augment, that kind of human understanding.
Brilliant. Thanks, James. And thank you all three of you. That's been a really amazing discussion. I think really, really interesting insights. We have got a few questions and a few minutes to answer them. The first one I think sits squarely in a continuation of what you were just talking about, James, which is, and I think there is probably a nervousness about, AI doing things instead of us. So, right. The augmentation piece is really important in our world. But the question is basically, AI driven versus AI informed. Where are we on that spectrum? And do you think it's going to change over the next few years?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Great. It's a great topic. It's one of the most relevant, certainly for the AI side. I mean, in the context of say Dragonfly AI, for our tool, Dragonfly really understands where people are looking. It's very good at the attention part, but it has no idea at the moment, whether you like what you see or whether, it's the right price point or whether it's appealing to your demographic. We just focus on that one piece. So I think, at least from our personal perspective, Dragonfly can never replace, that human element. We're definitely there to augment. We're there to add data to the conversation, generate ideas, generate discussion around new hypotheses, new test ideas, or the creative process, just to help augment what's already there. Obviously AI, as things move forward, will get better and better and more kind of accomplished at, maybe predicting kind of top level outcomes but again, I don't see it, apart from automation, automation is there to try and minimize labor intensive activities and make you more efficient, more effective. But really that's just to allow you to concentrate on the things that matter most, the things that give you the most ROI. So I don't see it replacing people. I don't see AI suddenly on the verge of displacing that role. I just think it's going to become better at kind of augmenting, what we do today.
Thank you. Really clear. We've got a question from Amy in the audience, which is, I think probably I'll ask this of all three of you because it's a really good question. And the question is, what would you say your most successful test has been? Josh, why don't you start?
Yeah, I think in terms of kind of ROI of a test, this wasn't necessarily the biggest winner, but it was the one that stood out to me as the tiny amount of effort invested to come to the hypothesis and then the kind of proportionately massive gains that came at the back of it. And I'm going to shamelessly plug Dragonfly here as the tool that actually drove me to the hypothesis. This is when I worked for a travel company and we were sort of reviewing their booking funnel and spotted there was a sort of, I suppose, drastically skewed level of attention focused on the progress bar of that funnel. Kind of supported that with a couple of extra points and eventually sort of landed on the hypothesis of we're mismanaging users' expectations with the labeling that sits on this progress bar. So I think all in all, probably an hour invested to come to that idea and to actually change the labeling of the progress bar, and that generated six-figure extra revenue just from changing the name of a couple of steps. And because it was such a minor change, I know I wouldn't have looked at it if I hadn't had something that was kind of directly pointing me right at it. It was one of those ones that could very easily go under the radar, but just amounts to being a bizarrely big win, I think, in the context of what it was.
That's really interesting. Thanks, Josh. Sandeep, same question. What was your most successful test, do you think?
Yeah, a test is difficult. As you mentioned, got a few gray hairs, I think, now. But there are two which always spring to mind. One is similar to what Josh said, actually, you know, there was a kind of final step button on a checkout journey. So on the payment page, and we made the main call to action 50% taller. Grand scheme of things, it was like 10 pixels. But it was a 6-figure per month, you know, above above 100 grand a month incremental revenue, just because it was easier to engage with, or it caught people's attention a little bit more, made clear on a slightly otherwise crowded page what to do next. Or something deeply subconscious, which just said pay now, and people thought, okay, sure. So that's one. And the other one is actually on the complete other side of things, which is mitigating risk. You know, we had someone doing a full site relaunch, complete reskin, looked amazing. And we said, hey, can we at least test a new version and make sure people don't freak out? And it would have been the worst thing they'd have ever done to their business if they'd have just gone live with it. Kind of, you know, big bang approach where it's just all in. So, you know, always test. That's the, no, whether good or bad, big or small, always test. You know, you'll always surprise yourself.
It sounds like there's some really good revenue reasons for doing it by the sound of both those examples. So thank you. James, from the perspective of Dragonfly, what have our most successful tests been, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we're in a, you know, it's a great, you know, position to be able to work with so many different customers in different sectors. I mean, I think maybe to pick one that's maybe a little bit different to what the guys are focused on, rather than say kind of a revenue generating example, maybe a cost reduction example would be interesting. So one that kind of stands out to me is we did some work a little while ago with one of the big utility companies around like water. And rather than it being, you know, trying to generate more sales, it was more around how can you guide people towards more cost effective ways to sign up or pay. You know, so it was more of a kind of, you know, you've got some very, you know, cost centers around, you know, call centers and support, and a lot of people were phoning in. And this particular customer we worked with went through a bit of a redesign exercise around certain pages that were key to that journey. Obviously, you know, Dragonfly was a component within that, you know, not the entire thing, but it was a big part of that redesign and validation. And it was brilliant to see them get a huge uplift in direct debit signups, which was essentially their main driver. That they were trying to guide people more towards that. I think it was a 33% increase for them in direct debit signups within about 8 weeks. I think, Mark, you might have to correct me on the number of weeks, but it was a reasonably short period of time that they.
I think it was a bit shorter. I think it was probably 4 to 5 weeks, but you know, really good example actually.
Yeah.
Go on, carry on.
No, I was just going to say, sort of, it's nice to think about, you know, ways that you can both increase revenue, but also try and reduce costs, you know, with regards to kind of influencing behavior or guiding people to more towards self-service pathways, if that's relevant to you as a brand.
Brilliant. Well, look, I mean, I think that kind of brings us almost to the end of our kind of public session. And I just want to say a huge thank you to Sandeep, James and Josh for, I think, you know, fascinating insight and discussion, and also for some really top tips there. I think it'd be really, really useful. Thank you to everybody attending. Just to be aware, we are going to break out into sessions, so we'll have a bit more of an opportunity to have sort of more you know, intimate sessions with our experts. So what we'll do is we'll publish that in the chat feature. I'll leave the webinar open for a minute or so people can pick up the link and click through. And just thank you so much for joining, and thank you guys for a fascinating discussion. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks everyone. Cheers, guys.
Thanks, everyone.